Chapter 1. The Storm. The storm came with the kind of brutality that only existed on worlds forgotten by time. Dreeken, 7 had always been a planet known for its icy plains and bone-chilling winds, its surface pocked with jagged craters and mountains whose tops pierced the heavens with sharp spikes of stone. The climate here was nothing short of punishing, a land that knew only extremes. Blistering cold in the winter months and suffocating heat in the summer. But it was winter now, and the storm that had descended upon the planet was unlike any the Drakens had ever seen. The air, thick with frost and swirling snowflakes, seemed to be alive with a menacing energy, and the landscape, typically vast and desolate, was now an unforgiving void. The wind howled with such intensity that it felt as if the very planet was roaring in fury, as if it wanted to tear apart everything in its path. Everything, that is, except for the small, fragile figure staggering through the snowdrifts. The child was barely more than a faint silhouette against the blinding whiteness of the blizzard, her skin an unnatural pale blue that almost blended with the landscape. Her body was slight and fragile, far too small for the brutal conditions of Dreeken, 7, and yet she moved as though she had no choice but to keep pushing forward. She was alone, and the isolation of the wasteland mirrored the emptiness she felt inside. Her breath came in ragged gasps, visible in the freezing air as it escaped in clouds of mist. The cold was unforgiving, seeping into her bones, numbing her limbs with every passing moment. The storm had come upon her so quickly, so unexpectedly, that she had no time to prepare, no shelter to run to. She had been cast out abandoned by those who had once called her their own, and now she was left to face the storm, the cold, and the harsh reality of her existence. She had been born a child of Dreeken, 7, a native of the icy planet, but she was not like the others of her kind. Her people were hardy, built to withstand the extremes of the environment, but they had a system, a social order that was strict and unforgiving. The child had been deemed an anomaly, a failure in their eyes, and for that reason, she had been cast aside, abandoned in the unforgiving wilderness. The reasons for her rejection were simple. Her body was too weak, her eyes too large, her form too delicate for the harshness of the planet. She was different, and in a world where conformity was the law, difference was a death sentence. So, they had left her to fend for herself, abandoned in the heart of the storm, with no hope of survival except the faintest spark of instinct that told her to keep moving. Her body trembled with exhaustion, her movements growing slower and more labored with each step. She had been walking for what felt like days, though she had no sense of time in this endless white expanse. Her thoughts were muddled, her mind clouded with the cold and the overwhelming sense of hopelessness. She couldn't remember how long it had been since she was cast out, but it didn't matter. Time had lost its meaning in this place, where every second felt like an eternity. The landscape around her was a blur, nothing but endless stretches of snow and ice that offered no comfort, no hope. Her feet were numb from the cold, her fingers stiff, her legs shaking beneath her. The wind, sharp and biting, cut through her clothes, and her skin began to freeze, the chill creeping into her very marrow. She stumbled again, her foot slipping in the snow, and she fell to the ground with a thud, the icy surface biting into her palms as she tried to push herself up. But the effort was too much, and she collapsed, her body unable to fight the overwhelming cold any longer. Her eyes fluttered shut, and for a moment, it felt as though the world had ceased to exist. The storm, the cold, the loneliness, all of it faded into nothingness. She felt herself sinking into the depths of the storm, her body giving in to the inevitable. Her chest rose and fell slowly, each breath harder to take than the last, as the darkness of the freezing wasteland began to consume her. But just as the darkness seemed to claim her completely, there was a sudden change, a shift in the air, a sound that cut through the howling wind. It was faint at first, barely audible above the storm's fury, but it grew louder, more distinct. The child's ears perked up, her senses sharpened by the desperation of her survival. A low hum, almost like the sound of machinery, reached her, and for a brief moment, she thought she was imagining it. But then she heard it again, closer this time. It was a sound of life, of something other than the endless storm that had trapped her in its merciless grasp. The sound of machinery, of something far more human than she had expected to encounter in this desolate place. Her heart skipped a beat as her blurry vision tried to focus on the figure approaching through the storm. It was another silhouette, like her own, but this one was far larger, far more distinct, cutting through the snow with ease. The hum of machinery grew louder, and the child realized that whatever this figure was, it wasn't native to Dreeken 7. It wasn't one of her own kind, nor was it something she had ever seen before. As the figure drew closer, she could see that it was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, his figure obscured by the storm, but his movements purposeful and confident. He was unlike anything she had imagined. His clothing was thick, heavy, designed to withstand the cold in ways that her own clothing never could. A helmet obscured much of his face, but his eyes, even from a distance, seemed to gleam with a strange intensity. And though the storm battered him with the same ferocity it had battered her, he seemed undeterred, unwavering in his approach. The child's heart pounded in her chest as she watched him draw closer, unsure of what to make of this unexpected savior, this human figure who had appeared out of nowhere, cutting through the storm with a grace and precision that seemed to defy the odds. She had never seen a human before, never had the chance to learn of them, but in that moment, as he neared her with determination in his steps, she felt a flicker of hope, something that had been extinguished the moment she had been cast out. The cold had nearly claimed her, but this man, this stranger, was a new possibility. The man reached her just as she thought she might lose consciousness. He didn't hesitate. There was no time for hesitation in this storm. He knelt beside her, his gloved hands reaching down to lift her from the snow, his touch firm and steady. She wanted to scream, to fight, to push him away, but the exhaustion was too great, and the cold had numbed her so completely that she could barely move. His voice was muffled by the helmet, but she could hear the urgency in his tone as he spoke. "Hang on, kid. I've got you. You're going to be all right." The words, though spoken through the lens of a helmet, were a lifeline, a beacon in the overwhelming darkness. His arms, strong and firm, encircled her as he lifted her from the freezing ground and cradled her against his chest. She could feel the warmth of his body through the thick layers of his clothing, and for the first time since the storm had begun, she felt something other than the cold. It was warmth. As the man carried her through the storm, she felt her limbs begin to thaw, her body slowly coming back to life. The world around her was a blur of white, but she knew she was no longer alone. The storm had not claimed her after all. A human had appeared in the midst of it, bringing her the one thing she had not expected to receive on this forsaken planet: hope. The wind howled with the fury of 100 storm-tossed oceans, clawing at the child's skin with icy talons, relentless in its pursuit to strip away any warmth left in her. She felt herself slipping away, the world fading into a haze of cold and darkness. Her vision blurred, and the edges of her consciousness began to fray, like fraying threads pulling apart in the storm's icy grip. The snow, which had once seemed like a backdrop to her struggle, now became a suffocating blanket, smothering her every breath, numbing her mind. She tried to focus, tried to hold on to the faintest shred of survival instinct, but everything was growing distant, as if she were sinking into a deep, frozen abyss. But then, as if from nowhere, there was a presence. A warmth, unfamiliar but welcome, seeped through the cold that had claimed her. The sound of the wind was still deafening, but it was as though the storm had suddenly quieted in the wake of this new reality. The human had reached her just in time, his arms strong, pulling her close, holding her against the freezing elements with the force of someone who knew what it was like to fight against the odds. The sensation of warmth that enveloped her was strange, unfamiliar. It wasn't the warmth of the sun that she had once known on her home world, but a raw, human heat, unlike anything she had felt before. And in that moment, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't known she had left: hope. The human did not hesitate. He moved with a purpose that belied the chaos around them, as if he had been prepared for this moment long before the storm had ever begun. The cold, fierce as it was, seemed to hold no sway over him. His body, encased in heavy layers designed to shield him from the harshness of Dreeken 7's weather, acted as a barrier between her fragile form and the brutal storm. Every step he took carried them farther from the heart of the blizzard, away from the frozen wasteland where she had been abandoned. Her limbs were leaden, unresponsive, as he carried her. She could feel the strength of his arms as he held her close, the solid, unwavering pressure of his chest against her side. He spoke in low, steady tones, though she could barely make out the words. His voice, muffled by the layers of his helmet and the howling wind, was a steady cadence in the chaos. "Just hold on. I'm getting you out of here. Stay with me." The child wanted to speak, to ask him where he was taking her, to question why he had come for her, but the words stuck in her throat. Her body was fighting to stay conscious, but the cold had taken so much from her, and now, with the promise of warmth, it was almost too much to comprehend. She could feel the numbness beginning to ease in her limbs, and yet it was as if she were floating, tethered only to the warmth of his body and the promise of safety. His steps were sure and quick, cutting through the snow with determination as they moved, leaving behind only the faintest traces of their path in the deep white. The landscape was alien to her in this storm, disorienting, a whirlwind of ice and snow that seemed to stretch forever. She had once known the vastness of Dreeken 7 as a harsh, unforgiving expanse, but this was different. It felt like a world lost to time, where no one should be found. Yet here he was, a human, out of place and unexpected, offering her the one thing she had thought was beyond her reach: survival. Chapter 2. The Shelter. The world had gone still, quiet even in the heart of the storm. The howling winds were a distant memory, swallowed by the sudden stillness of the place the human had brought her to. It was only when she realized the storm's fury had died down that the child opened her eyes, though they fluttered at first, struggling to focus, to make sense of what was around her. She lay on a bed of soft material, thick blankets, not unlike the ones she had seen in the dwellings of other Dreeken 7 natives, though this was different, warmer, almost soothing in its unfamiliarity. Above her, the ceiling was curved, smooth metallic in its sheen, far from the stone and ice of her home. There was no sky above, no wind, no snow. Instead, a dim light emanated from above, soft and steady. It felt artificial, yet comforting. The child blinked a few times, her eyes adjusting as she tried to take in her surroundings. The human had laid her down gently, his presence hovering nearby, but his movements were calm, purposeful. He was kneeling by a small, humming device near the bed, its soft glow a stark contrast to the harshness of the outside world. The sound of mechanical whirring filled the air, but it was not harsh, it was soothing, like the hum of a machine designed to heal rather than harm. She felt the warmth beginning to radiate from the blankets she lay on, the sensation of heat filling her chest and limbs, and for the first time, her body began to remember how to live. The human spoke, his voice carrying over to her, as though the storm itself had ceased to exist. "You're safe now. You're inside." The child's voice was weak when she finally managed to speak, her lips trembling as she tried to form words. Where am I?" "You're in my shelter," the human replied, his voice low but filled with an undeniable reassurance. "You were out there for a long time. I found you in the storm." The child tried to sit up, but her body protested, muscles still weak from the cold. She felt the weight of exhaustion settle back over her like a heavy cloak, but it was not the same. It was not the soul-deep weariness of survival in the storm, it was the peaceful exhaustion of safety, of being protected. She looked around the room once more, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings. The walls were smooth and dark, made of a material she had never seen before. It wasn't stone. It wasn't ice. It was something different. It seemed to pulse with an energy she couldn't understand. It felt like a vessel, something built to carry life, not destroy it. The human was still kneeling by the device, watching her, his eyes soft with concern. He hadn't taken off his helmet yet, but she could see the faint outline of his face through the visor. His gaze was kind, patient, as though he had all the time in the world. "You're safe here," he repeated. "You don't have to worry anymore." She didn't know why, but his words comforted her in a way she hadn't thought possible. In that moment, for the first time since the storm had taken her, she felt a flicker of something that could have been called hope. She had been abandoned, left to die in the cold, yet here she was, in the warmth, with someone who had saved her life. She couldn't fathom it, didn't understand how this human had found her, how he had appeared from nowhere when she had all but given up. Why did you help me?" Her voice was small, fragile, barely a whisper. The human's eyes softened, and he stepped closer to her, pulling up a chair by the bed. Because no one deserves to die in that storm. Not you. Not anyone. And I couldn't leave you out there, not after everything. The child looked up at him, feeling something shift deep inside her chest. Something she hadn't known was even capable of growing in a place like this, a world of endless cold and isolation. He wasn't like the others she had known, the ones who had cast her aside. He didn't look at her with disgust or fear. He looked at her like she was a person, a living being deserving of kindness and care. "My name is Sam," the human said, his voice calm, yet filled with something like warmth she had never known. "I'm not from here. I come from a planet called Earth. You're safe now." Her gaze flickered over him again, taking in the strange outfit he wore, the futuristic technology that surrounded them. She didn't understand it all, but she understood one thing: this human had saved her life. And for the first time, the future didn't seem as bleak as it once had. It wasn't filled with ice and snow and loneliness. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the child saw a new world, a world of possibilities, of hope. And maybe, just maybe, she was no longer alone. The child slowly began to regain her bearings, her senses once numbed by the brutal storm, now coming back to life, albeit sluggishly. She couldn't remember how long she had been unconscious, nor could she remember how Sam had managed to save her, but the warmth that radiated from the shelter wrapped around her like a protective cocoon. She had never experienced warmth like this before. Dreeken 7, even in its rare moments of calm, was a planet born from extremes, never truly warm, always harsh, always cold. But here, inside Sam's shelter, there was a tangible comfort, one she couldn't fathom, one she never thought possible. The shelter wasn't large, but it was efficient. Walls made of smooth, reflective material that shimmered faintly in the dim light, perhaps engineered to protect against the planet's relentless storms. The air inside was warm, and every breath felt like a gift, a luxury the child had never had the privilege of knowing in the freezing wastelands. The bed beneath her was soft, cushioned by layers of unknown fabric that felt gentle against her skin. The strange, humming machines around her buzzed with purpose, each a silent worker in this little sanctuary. The child's eyes darted from one piece of equipment to another, her mind racing as she tried to comprehend what had happened. She had been on the brink of death, but now, she was safe. Safe, at least, for the moment. Safe with this strange human who, despite his foreign appearance and technology, had done the one thing no one else had ever done for her: saved her. Sam hadn't spoken much since bringing her inside. He seemed to be giving her time to adjust, to heal. When he did speak, his voice was calm and gentle, almost as though he were afraid to startle her. "Take your time," he had said when she tried to sit up. "You've been through a lot." She had tried to ask him questions, to understand who he was, why he was on Dreeken 7, why he had come to her, but the words had stuck in her throat. She wasn't ready to ask those questions yet. Part of her, the part that had been broken by the storm, feared the answer. What if he left her too? What if this strange warmth, this feeling of safety, was fleeting? But as the days passed, the child found herself growing accustomed to Sam's presence. He was unlike anyone she had known. Despite the hard, imposing armor he wore designed for survival in extreme conditions, his demeanor was soft, patient. He didn't push her for answers. He didn't question her strange form or her past. He didn't seem to care that she was different. To him, she was just a child who had survived the storm. Nothing more, nothing less. One evening, as they sat together near a small, flickering fire, Sam spoke again, his tone thoughtful. "You're lucky to be alive." The child's eyes narrowed slightly. "Lucky?" she asked, her voice hoarse from disuse. "I was abandoned by my own people." Sam's gaze softened, and he slowly took off his helmet, revealing his face for the first time. He wasn't young, but he wasn't old either. His face was weathered, as if he had lived through countless battles, his eyes a sharp contrast to the warm kindness in his voice. "You're not alone anymore," he said simply. "Whatever happened before, it doesn't matter now. What matters is that you're here, and I'll make sure you get the chance to live." The child's heart tightened at his words. The warmth that had surrounded her since his arrival began to feel like something that was more than just survival, more than just fleeting. She had heard those words before, but never from someone who truly meant them. "Why?" she whispered. "Why are you helping me?" Sam took a deep breath before responding. "Because I've seen what happens when people are left to die, and I don't want to be the kind of person who leaves someone in that storm, even if they're not from my world." The child stared at him, her silver eyes wide. She had never known anyone to speak with such sincerity, such genuine care. She had been abandoned so many times, so many lifetimes ago, that the thought of someone helping her simply because it was the right thing to do felt almost impossible. For the first time in her life, she let herself believe in kindness again. The days turned into a rhythm, one that the child found herself growing accustomed to. Sam's presence was a constant in the shelter. He was there when she woke, when she ate, and when she rested. There was no rush, no urgency in his movements, no hint of impatience. He simply existed in a space of quiet care, and for the first time in her life, the child felt truly seen, like her existence had meaning, even if she couldn't quite grasp the full scope of it yet. The shelter, as strange and unfamiliar as it was, became her sanctuary. The walls, made of a material that hummed with warmth and energy, provided her with protection not just from the storm outside, but from the ghosts of her past. She had been abandoned, cast aside by her own people for being different, for being deemed an anomaly in a world that prized conformity above all else. She had never expected kindness, never anticipated the possibility of being saved. Yet, here she was safe, warm, and healing. The food Sam provided her with was unlike anything she had ever tasted. It wasn't that it was better or worse than the food from Dreeken, 7, but it was different. It was richer in texture, in flavor. The sustenance came not from the frozen tundra she had grown up in, but from places beyond her imagination. It was the food of another world's world, Earth. At first, she had hesitated to eat, unsure of the unfamiliar dish. But Sam had patiently explained the purpose of each meal, and gradually, the child learned to trust him, to accept the gift of nourishment he offered her without hesitation. The room they shared was simple, practical even, but filled with a comfort she hadn't known she was missing. It wasn't just the warmth or the food. It was the presence of another being, someone who cared for her without any ulterior motive, without expecting anything in return. Sam had given her something that had once seemed impossible, a sense of belonging. He didn't question her, didn't judge her for her alien features, her strange form. He simply accepted her for who she was, and that was something the child had never known. Sam spent his days working on the various pieces of equipment scattered around the shelter, repairing the life support systems, and maintaining the strange machines that kept the environment warm and safe. He worked with a quiet intensity, but when he spoke to her, it was always in a way that made her feel like she wasn't just a bystander in his world. He included her in his tasks, explaining things to her, teaching her about the technology that had saved her life. The child, in turn, asked him questions about his homeworld Earth and learned of a civilization that was different from her own in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. There were days when Sam would ask her to step outside with him, to gather data from the shelter's external sensors, to check the storm's progress, or take a sample of the planet's atmosphere. These tasks were small, but they gave her purpose, gave her something to do other than simply recover. She learned how to operate the external equipment, how to gather data from the alien world they found themselves on, and as she did, a strange sense of confidence began to grow within her. She was no longer just a child who had been abandoned. She was someone who could contribute, someone who could help. And yet, even as the days passed and she became stronger, a sense of uncertainty lingered beneath the surface. She still didn't know why Sam had chosen to save her, why he had come to her aid in the storm. She didn't know what he wanted from her, if anything at all. There were moments when she caught him staring at her, his expression unreadable, as though he were considering something far beyond the immediate concern of survival. Those moments left her with an unsettled feeling, like there was something she wasn't being told, something that hovered just out of reach. Still, for now, she was content to live in the shelter, to focus on healing, and to let the future unfold without fear. The storm outside had quieted, and in its wake, the world was a strange, new place. Chapter 3: The Healing Process. As the days turned to weeks, the child's strength slowly returned. Her body, once frail and weakened by the cold, was now gaining back the vitality she had lost. Her limbs, stiff from the frostbite and exhaustion, began to regain their flexibility, and her mind, once clouded with the haze of near-death, grew sharper with each passing day. But it wasn't just the physical healing that was taking place. There was a transformation happening within her, one that went beyond the mere restoration of her body. She had been cast out, abandoned by her people, left to freeze in the storm without a second thought. She had learned to expect nothing more than rejection, to assume that she was always on the outside, always the outcast. But now, in the warmth of Sam's shelter, she began to feel something she hadn't felt in years: hope. She began to believe that perhaps there was a future for her beyond the harsh, unforgiving ice plains of Dreeken 7. Perhaps, just perhaps, she could forge a new path, one not defined by the mistakes of her past, but by the choices she made now. The shelter became a cocoon for her, a safe space where she could shed the skin of her old life and begin anew. Sam had provided the foundation, the care, and the safety she needed to heal, but it was up to her to decide what kind of life she wanted to build now. It wasn't easy. The scars of her past were still there, lurking beneath the surface, reminders of the loneliness and the rejection she had endured. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't alone. Sam was there, always watching over her, always supporting her, always offering her the kind of care that her people never had. One evening, as the sun set outside the shelter, painting the icy plains in hues of purple and orange, the child stood at the window, looking out at the vast, alien world. The wind was still howling, but the storm was no longer a threat. It was just the cold that remained, the natural cold of the planet that had become home to so many who had nowhere else to go. Sam joined her at the window, standing beside her in silence. The two of them watched the storm, feeling the isolation of the moment, but also the connection they had forged between them. It was a quiet kind of peace, one born of shared survival, of shared experience. "You're stronger than I thought you were," Sam said, his voice breaking the silence. The child turned to look at him, her silver eyes meeting his gaze. "I'm still learning what it means to be strong." Sam nodded, understanding. "You've already come further than anyone thought you could. You've survived a storm that was meant to kill you. That's strength in my book." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The shelter hummed softly, the only sound the faint whir of machinery keeping them warm. Outside, the wind still howled, but it no longer felt threatening. It felt like the natural rhythm of the planet, a part of the world they had both come to accept. "I don't know what happens next," the child whispered, looking out at the vast, frozen landscape. "I don't know where I go from here." "You go wherever you want," Sam said simply. "You've got a future now, one you can shape however you like." For the first time in her life, the child allowed herself to believe in that future. It was no longer a future of isolation, of cold and rejection. It was a future full of possibilities, a future where she could choose her path, where she could be more than just the abandoned child left to die in a storm. And with Sam by her side, maybe just maybe she could finally have the life she had always dreamed of. The days continued to pass in a quiet, peaceful rhythm. As her body healed, the child found herself spending more time outside, exploring the strange new world that Sam had brought her to. Each day, she grew stronger, her limbs regaining their strength, her breath less labored as she ventured out into the barren, icy landscape. Though the wind still howled, it no longer felt like a threat. The storm had passed, and with it, the child began to feel a new sense of possibility, a hope that had been buried deep within her for so long, now flickering to life again. Sam, always patient, always steady, taught her how to operate the devices outside the shelter, tools that could measure the atmosphere, track storms, and even tap into the communication networks that were scattered across Dreeken 7. He was skilled, and she could tell that his knowledge went far beyond what was needed for survival. He had a vast understanding of technology, something that both amazed and intrigued her. She had never been taught such things. Her people had focused on survival, on the harshness of their environment, on the constant battle against the elements. But Sam showed her that there was more to the world than mere survival. There was knowledge. There was progress. There was a way forward. One afternoon, as the two of them worked outside the shelter, the child had a moment of clarity. As she adjusted the controls on a communication relay, she glanced over at Sam, his face hidden behind his helmet, but the way he moved, purposeful, confident, made her feel something she had never felt before. He wasn't just saving her. He was showing her that there was more to life than she had ever been told. He was teaching her that her existence had meaning beyond the rejection of her people. She wasn't just an outcast. She wasn't just abandoned. She was capable. She was strong. She could choose her path. Later that evening, as they sat in the warmth of the shelter, Sam spoke softly, his voice laced with a quiet intensity. We've been here for weeks now. The storm's cleared, and the planet is still as harsh as ever. But I think it's time we talk about the next steps. The child looked up from the meal Sam had prepared. The next steps? She asked, her voice hesitant, unsure of what he meant. Sam sat down beside her, his helmet off, his face calm and steady. You're getting stronger. You've healed from the worst of it. But this planet is still dangerous. Dreeken, 7 isn't the place for you. You need to have a future beyond this shelter, beyond surviving here. I can help you find that. I think you deserve more than what this world can give you. The child's heart raced as she processed his words. What do you mean? She asked, her voice small, though there was a flicker of hope in it now. I mean, Sam said, leaning forward, that you don't have to stay here forever. I've got the means to get us off this planet. There are other worlds where you can find a place to belong. You can have a future if you're willing to take the leap with me. The child's mind spun. She had never considered leaving Dreeken, 7, never thought there was anywhere else she could go. But now, with Sam's offer on the table, a new door seemed to open before her, one that led to a life she had never imagined. She looked down at her hands, her fingers still strong from the hard work Sam had taught her. She thought of the vast, empty landscape outside and the possibility of leaving it behind. She thought of Sam, who had brought her warmth, who had shown her that she wasn't just a forgotten child cast aside by the world. She was something more. Her voice, though still uncertain, was stronger now. Where would we go? Sam smiled, his eyes soft with understanding. Wherever you want. There are places where people like you are accepted. There are worlds where you don't have to hide, where your strength is seen as a gift, not a curse. And if you want to find it, I'll help you. I'll be with you every step of the way. For the first time since the storm had brought her to the shelter, the child felt the full weight of her choices. She could stay here, in the cold, isolated from everything, living a life dictated by the harshness of the planet. Or she could take a chance, leave Dreeken, 7 behind, and embrace the unknown. Sam had given her a chance, a way out. But it was up to her to decide if she was ready to take it. Chapter 4, The New Beginning. The days that followed were filled with preparation. Sam showed the child how to use the communication equipment to track ships that passed through Dreeken 7's orbit, how to tap into long-range communication networks to send distress signals or requests for transportation. They gathered what supplies they could, stowing them carefully inside the shelter. Sam even brought out a small, sleek shuttle he had hidden outside an old, but functional ship that could carry them to the stars. The child had never seen such a thing up close, but now, with Sam's guidance, she learned how to pilot it, how to navigate the vastness of space. The excitement in the air was palpable, but so too was the undercurrent of fear. Leaving Dreeken, 7 meant leaving behind everything she had ever known. The icy plains, the relentless cold, the endless loneliness. It also meant stepping into a world that was unfamiliar, full of unknowns. She had no idea what awaited her beyond the stars. But Sam's presence, steady and unwavering, gave her the courage to face it. Finally, the day came when they were ready to leave. The shuttle was prepped, the airlock sealed, and the engines hummed with life as they powered up. Sam stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder, as they gazed out at the cold horizon one last time. You sure about this? Sam asked, his voice steady. The child turned to him, her silver eyes shining with a mix of resolve and excitement. Yes, she said, her voice stronger than it had ever been. I'm ready. With a final glance at the barren landscape of Dreeken 7, they boarded the shuttle. The doors closed, and the engines roared to life, lifting them off the surface of the planet. The vast expanse of space awaited them, the stars stretching out in every direction, full of infinite possibilities. As the shuttle broke through Dreeken 7's atmosphere and into the blackness of space, the child watched in awe as the icy planet receded into the distance. It was a small, cold world now, a world she was leaving behind. But she wasn't leaving alone. She had Sam beside her, and with him, a future full of promise. For the first time in her life, She wasn't just surviving. She was living. And as the shuttle flew toward the stars, the child knew that she had found her place. A place where she belonged. A place where she could thrive.